The sun was just coming up over the Wellington estate when Marcus opened his eyes. He lived in a small room at the back of the property, near the gardening shed. The room had a single bed, a wooden chair, and a small window that let in just enough light. It was not much, but it was home now. Marcus got up and splashed cold water on his face. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror on the wall. He was 32 years old, but his eyes looked older. They carried a heaviness that came from years of hardship and loss. He ran his fingers through his dark hair and took a deep breath. Another day of work was waiting for him. He put on his simple work clothes and stepped outside. The Wellington estate was one of the largest properties in the entire region. The main house was a massive mansion with white walls and tall columns. There were gardens that stretched for acres, a swimming pool that sparkled like a blue diamond, and fountains that sprayed water into the air. Everything about the place spoke of money and power. Marcus had been working here as a caretaker for 3 years. His job was to keep the property clean and well maintained. He swept the floors, trimmed the hedges, fixed broken things, and made sure everything looked perfect. The work was hard, but he never complained. He needed this job more than anything. The Wellington family rarely noticed him. To them, he was just another worker, almost invisible. Richard Wellington, the owner of the estate, was a billionaire businessman. He had made his fortune in real estate and investments. He was a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to look right through people. His wife had passed away many years ago, and now he lived in the big house with his staff and his memories. Marcus picked up his broom and began sweeping the front steps of the mansion. The marble was smooth and cold under his feet. He moved slowly and carefully, making sure not to miss any spot. As he worked, his mind drifted to another time, a time when his hands did not hold brooms and rakes, a time when they danced across piano keys. Many people knew that Marcus had once been a pianist, and not just any pianist. He had been a prodigy. His mother had discovered his talent when he was just 5 years old. She had taken him to a neighbor's house where there was an old piano. Little Marcus had sat down and started playing a song he had heard on the radio. His fingers moved like they already knew where to go. The neighbor had been shocked. His mother had cried with joy. From that day on, music became Marcus's whole life. His mother worked 2 jobs to pay for his lessons. She cleaned houses during the day and worked at a restaurant at night. Every penny she could save went toward his education. She believed in him completely. She always said that his gift was given by God, and it was his duty to share it with the world. Marcus studied at the Royal Conservatory of Music. His teachers said he was one of the most talented students they had ever seen. By the time he was 20, he had performed at some of the most famous concert halls in the world. He had played at Carnegie Hall in New York. Critics called him a genius. People said he had a bright future ahead of him. But life does not always follow the path we plan. When Marcus was 25, his mother became very sick. The doctors said she had a serious illness that needed expensive treatment. Marcus did not hesitate. He used all his savings to pay for her medical care. When the money ran out, he sold his belongings. He sold his car, his furniture, and finally, his most precious possession, his piano. But even that was not enough. His mother's condition grew worse. Marcus stopped performing so he could take care of her. He spent every moment by her side, holding her hand, reading to her, playing music on a small radio. For 2 years, he watched the strongest woman he had ever known become weaker and weaker. She passed away on a cold winter night. Marcus held her hand as she took her last breath. In that moment, something inside him broke. The music that had always lived in his heart went silent. He could not bring himself to touch a piano ever again. After his mother's funeral, Marcus had nothing left. No money, no home, no career. The music world had moved on without him. New stars had risen. His name was forgotten. He wandered from place to place, taking whatever work he could find. He washed dishes at restaurants. He carried boxes at warehouses. He slept in shelters when he had nowhere else to go. Then, 3 years ago, he saw an advertisement for a caretaker position at the Wellington estate. The pay was modest, but it came with a room and meals. Marcus applied and got the job. He never mentioned his past to anyone. He never spoke about the concerts or the fame or the piano. That part of his life was over. He was just a caretaker now, nothing more. But sometimes late at night, when the big house was empty and dark, Marcus would walk through the hallways. He would find his way to the drawing room, where a beautiful grand piano sat near the window. It was a Steinway, worth more money than Marcus would earn in a lifetime. He would stand there and look at it, his heart aching some nights. He would sit on the bench. He would lift the cover and look at the black and white keys. His fingers would hover above them, trembling, but he could never bring himself to play. The pain was too great. The memories were too heavy, so he would simply sit there in the darkness, remembering what he had lost. The other workers on the estate thought Marcus was strange. He kept to himself and rarely spoke. He did his work quietly and went back to his small room. He had no friends, no family, no one who really knew him. He was like a ghost, moving through the property without leaving any trace. But Marcus was not completely alone. He had his memories of his mother. He had the music that still played in his head, even if it never came out. And deep down, in a place he tried to ignore, he still had hope. A hope that someday, Somehow, his life might change. Hope that the silence would end and the music would return. He did not know that change was coming. He did not know that in just a few weeks, his whole world would be turned upside down, and it would all start with the return of someone he had never met, someone who would see him not as a caretaker, but as a man with a story worth knowing. For now, Marcus finished sweeping the steps. He put away his broom and moved on to the next task. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the Wellington estate came to life. But Marcus remained in the shadows, invisible and forgotten, carrying a secret that no one would ever guess. A black car pulled through the iron gates of the Wellington estate on a bright Tuesday morning. The driver parked in front of the main entrance, and a young woman stepped out. She had long brown hair that fell past her shoulders and dark eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She wore simple clothes, just jeans and a white shirt, but she carried herself like royalty. This was Victoria Wellington, the only daughter of Richard Wellington, and she had finally come home. Victoria had been away for 5 years. She had studied business and art history at a university in London. After finishing her degree, she had traveled through Europe, visiting museums, attending concerts, and trying to find herself. Her father had wanted her to come home immediately and join his company, but Victoria was not ready. She needed time to figure out what she wanted from life. Now, at 26 years old, she felt it was time to return. She missed her home. She missed the gardens where she had played as a child. She missed the library filled with thousands of books. Most of all, she missed having a place where she truly belonged. Richard Wellington came out of the house to greet his daughter. He hugged her tightly, something he rarely did. He was not a man who showed his feelings easily, but Victoria could see the happiness in his eyes. She was his only child, his greatest treasure. Everything he had built was for her. "Welcome home, my dear," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "The house has been empty without you." Victoria smiled and looked around at the familiar Everything looked the same as she remembered. The white columns still stood tall and proud. The gardens were perfectly trimmed. The fountains still danced in the sunlight. But there was something different too. A quiet sadness hung over the place, like it was waiting for something. Over the next few days, Victoria settled back into her old life. She unpacked her bags, reconnected with old friends, and spent time with her father. But she quickly realized that some things had changed while she was away. Her father had become more obsessed with his business. He spent hours on the phone, making deals and giving orders. And when he was not working, he was planning Victoria's future. Richard had a list of young men he wanted Victoria to meet. They were sons of other wealthy families, businessmen, lawyers, and politicians. He organized dinners and parties, hoping that Victoria would find a suitable husband among them. But Victoria was not interested in any of these men. They talked about money and power and themselves. None of them seemed to care about anything real. "Father, I do not want to marry someone just because they are rich," Victoria said one evening at dinner. "I want to marry someone I truly love." Richard shook his head. "Love is a luxury, Victoria. In our world, marriage is about building alliances, securing the future. You will learn this in time." Victoria did not argue. She knew it was pointless. Her father's mind was set, but in her heart, she made a promise to herself. She would not marry anyone she did not love, no matter what her father said. One afternoon, Victoria was walking through the gardens when she noticed a man working near the rose bushes. He was kneeling on the ground, carefully removing weeds. His clothes were simple and worn, and his hands were covered in dirt. But there was something about him that caught her attention. He moved with a grace that seemed out of place for someone doing such rough work. His face was thoughtful, almost sad. Victoria stopped and watched him for a moment. The man did not notice her. He was completely focused on his task, treating each plant with gentle care. She had never seen anyone work like that before. Most of the staff rushed through their jobs, eager to finish. But this man seemed to find meaning in every small action. "Excuse me," Victoria said softly. The man looked up startled. When he saw her, he quickly stood up and lowered his head. "I am sorry, Miss Wellington. I did not see you there. I will move out of your way." "No, please," Victoria said. "You do not need to apologize. I was just watching you work. You take such care with the roses." The man seemed confused by her kindness. He was not used to being spoken to by the family. "Thank you, Miss. I just try to do my job well." Victoria noticed his voice. It was soft and educated, not what she expected from a caretaker. His words were carefully chosen, his pronunciation clear. This man had clearly received a good education at some point in his life. But what was he doing here, pulling weeds? "What is your name?" she asked. "Marcus, Miss Marcus Ashford." "How long have you worked here, Marcus?" 3 years, Miss. Victoria nodded slowly. 3 years. That meant he had started working here after she left for London. She had never met him before, never even heard of him, but something about him made her want to know more. "Well, Marcus, the roses look beautiful. You are doing a wonderful job." Marcus looked up briefly, and for a moment, their eyes met. Victoria saw something in his gaze. A depth, a pain, a story, waiting to be told. Then he quickly looked away again. "Thank you, miss. That is very kind." Victoria walked away, but she kept thinking about the encounter. There was a mystery surrounding this man, and she was determined to solve it. Over the following days, Victoria found herself watching Marcus. She observed him from the balcony as he worked in the gardens. She noticed how he would sometimes pause and stare into the distance, lost in thought. She saw how he stayed separate from the other workers, always alone, always quiet. One morning, she saw him enter the library through a side door. She waited a few minutes, then followed him inside. She found him standing near a bookshelf, holding an old leather-bound book. His eyes were moving across the pages with intense concentration. Victoria stepped closer and saw what he was reading. It was a collection of musical compositions by Chopin. The pages were yellow with age, and the notes were handwritten. It was a rare and valuable first edition. Marcus suddenly realized he was not alone. He looked up and saw Victoria standing there. His face went pale with fear. "Miss Wellington, I am so sorry," he said quickly, putting the book back on the shelf. "I should not be in here. I saw the book through the window and Victoria asked, genuinely surprised. Marcus hesitated. He seemed to be fighting with himself about how to answer. I used to study music. A long time ago." Victoria's eyes widened. "You studied music? Where?" Marcus looked at the floor. "It does not matter anymore. That was another life. Please forgive me for being where I should not be. It will not happen again." He moved toward the door, but Victoria stepped in front of him. "Wait," she said. "Please, I am not angry. I am curious. Will you tell me about it? About your music?" Marcus looked at her with confusion. No one had asked about his music in years. No one had cared. But this woman, this daughter of his employer, was looking at him with genuine interest, not with pity or judgment, but with real curiosity. Perhaps another time, miss," he said softly. "I have work to do." Victoria nodded and stepped aside to let him pass. As he walked away, she felt something stir in her heart. She did not know what it was yet, but she knew that this man was different from anyone she had ever met, and she knew that she would not rest until she learned his story. From that day on, Victoria began finding ways to cross paths with Marcus. She would walk through the gardens when she knew he was working there. She would visit the library at unusual hours, hoping to find him again. She was drawn to him in a way she could not explain. And slowly, without either of them realizing it, a connection was beginning to form. A connection that would change both of their lives forever. The days turned into weeks, and something beautiful began to grow between Marcus and Victoria. It started with small moments. A smile when they passed each other in the hallway. A brief conversation in the garden. A shared glance across the courtyard. These tiny encounters became the brightest parts of their days. Victoria was careful. She knew that her father would not approve of her spending time with a caretaker, so she kept their meetings secret. She would slip away when Richard was busy with his business calls. She would find Marcus in quiet corners of the estate where no one else went, and there, away from watching eyes, they would talk. The first real conversation happened in the old greenhouse at the edge of the property. It was a place that Victoria had loved as a child. Her mother used to grow orchids there before she passed away. Now it was mostly empty, filled with old pots and forgotten tools. But it was private, and that was what mattered. Victoria found Marcus there one afternoon, fixing a broken window. She watched him work for a moment before speaking. "You never told me about your music," she said. Marcus stopped what he was doing. He did not turn around. "There is not much to tell, miss. Please call me Victoria. And I think there is a lot to tell. I can see it in your eyes." Marcus finally turned to face her. His expression was guarded, like he was protecting something fragile inside himself. "Why do you want to know? I am just a caretaker. My past does not matter." Victoria sat down on an old wooden crate. "It matters to me. I have met so many people who have everything but feel nothing. But you have so little, yet you carry so much. I want to understand." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He looked at this young woman who was showing him kindness he had not known in years. Something in her voice told him that she was sincere. She was not asking out of curiosity or boredom. She genuinely cared. "I studied at the Royal Conservatory," he said quietly. "I started playing piano when I was 5. My mother, she sacrificed everything so I could pursue my dream." Victoria listened without interrupting. She could hear the emotion in his voice, the love for his mother, the pain of loss. "By the time I was 20, I was performing around the world. Critics said I had a gift. They said I was destined for greatness." Marcus laughed bitterly. "But life had other plans." "What happened?" Victoria asked gently. Marcus sat down on another crate across from her. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time he looked vulnerable. "My mother got sick. Very sick. The treatments were expensive. I sold everything I had. My savings, my possessions, my piano. But it was not enough. Nothing was ever enough." Victoria felt tears forming in her eyes. She could feel his pain as if it were her own. "She passed away 7 years ago," Marcus continued. "And when she died, something in me died too. The music that had always been my companion went silent. I could not play anymore. I could not even look at a piano without feeling like my heart was being torn apart." "I am so sorry," Victoria whispered. Marcus shook his head. "Do not be sorry. She had a good life. She saw me perform at the greatest concert halls in the world. She was proud of me. That is all that matters. From that day forward, their secret meetings became regular. Every afternoon, when Richard was occupied with work, Victoria would find Marcus. Sometimes they met in the greenhouse, sometimes in the old chapel at the far end of the property. Sometimes they just walked together through the forest paths where no one could see them. They talked about everything. Victoria told Marcus about her years in London, about feeling lost despite having everything. She told him about the pressure from her father to marry someone suitable. She told him about her dreams of living a life that meant something, not just a life of wealth and parties. Marcus, in turn, opened up more and more. He told her about his childhood in a small apartment with his mother. He told her about the joy of discovering music, how it felt like finding a part of himself he never knew existed. He described the thrill of performing, the way the audience would fall silent when he played, the connection he felt with something greater than himself. "Do you ever miss it?" Victoria asked one day. "The performing?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Every day. It is like missing a part of your soul. But I do not deserve to play anymore." "What do you mean?" "I could not save her," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "I had this gift, this talent that everyone said was special. But when it mattered most, when she needed me, it was worthless. What good is music if it cannot save the people you love?" Victoria reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they had touched. Marcus looked at her with surprise, but he did not pull away. "Your mother loved you," Victoria said firmly. "She believed in your gift. Do you think she would want you to punish yourself forever? Do you think she would want the music to die with her?" Marcus could not answer. The truth in her words cut through all the walls he had built around his heart. As the weeks passed, their connection deepened into something more. Victoria found herself thinking about Marcus constantly. She looked forward to their meetings more than anything else. When she was with him, she felt like she could be herself. Not Victoria Wellington, the billionaire's daughter. Just Victoria, a woman searching for meaning. Marcus felt the same way. For the first time in years, he felt alive. Victoria made him remember what it was like to hope, to dream, to believe that tomorrow might be better than today. She looked at him and saw not a failed musician or a lowly caretaker, but a man with value, a man worthy of love. One evening they met in the chapel as the sun was setting. The light came through the old stained glass windows, painting the room in colors of gold and red. Victoria was sitting at a dusty old piano that stood in the corner. "Play something for me," she said. Marcus froze. "I cannot. Please, just a few notes. I want to hear what the music sounds like when it comes from you." Marcus walked slowly to the piano. His hands were shaking. He had not played in so many years. The fear was overwhelming. What if he had lost his ability? What if the gift was gone forever? Victoria stood beside him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "I am here. You are not alone." Marcus sat down on the bench. He lifted his hands to the keys. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, he pressed down on a single note. The sound echoed through the empty chapel, pure and clear. Then another note, and another. His fingers began to move, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. He played a simple melody, something his mother used to hum when he was a child. The music filled the space, filled his heart, filled the emptiness that had lived inside him for so long. When he finished, there were tears streaming down his face. Victoria was crying too. "That was beautiful," she whispered. Marcus looked at her, and in that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a promise, a love that neither of them had expected but both of them had been waiting for their whole lives. "I love you," Victoria said. The words came out before she could stop them, but she did not regret them. They were true. Marcus took her hands in his. "I love you too, but this is impossible. Your father will never accept me. I have nothing to offer you. You have everything to offer me," Victoria replied. "You have your heart, your soul, your music. That is more than all the money in the world." They sat together in the fading light, knowing that difficult times lay ahead. Richard Wellington would never approve of their relationship. Society would judge them harshly. The road before them was filled with obstacles, but in that moment, none of it mattered. They had found each other. They had found love. And together, they believed they could face anything. What they did not know was that their secret was about to be discovered, and when it was, everything would change. The estate was buzzing with activity. Richard Wellington was preparing for his 60th birthday celebration, the biggest party the property had ever seen. Invitations had been sent to hundreds of guests, politicians, business leaders, celebrities, and old money families from across the country were coming. It was going to be an event that people would talk about for years. But while everyone else was focused on the party, Richard had something else on his mind. His daughter had been acting strangely lately. She seemed distracted, distant. She smiled more than usual, but her smiles were not for him. She disappeared for hours at a time, always with some excuse about walking in the gardens or reading in the library. Richard Wellington had not become a billionaire by ignoring warning signs. Something was going on, and he intended to find out what. He called his head of security, a serious man named Thomas, into his study. "I want you to watch my daughter," Richard said coldly. "Find out where she goes, who she meets. Report everything to me." Thomas nodded without asking questions. He had worked for Richard for 15 years and knew better than to argue. For 3 days, Thomas followed Victoria secretly. He watched her walk to the old greenhouse. He saw her meet with the caretaker named Marcus. He observed them talking, laughing, and holding hands. On the third day, he saw them kiss. Thomas reported everything to Richard that evening. The rage that filled Richard Wellington was unlike anything he had ever felt. His daughter, the heir to his empire, was involved with a servant, a caretaker, a man who cut hedges and swept floors. It was unthinkable. It was an insult to everything he had built. Richard sent for Victoria immediately. She came to his study, unaware of what had been discovered, but the moment she saw her father's face, she knew something was terribly wrong. "Close the door," Richard said. His voice was like ice. Victoria obeyed. She stood in front of his desk, her heart pounding. "Do you think I am a fool?" Richard asked. "Do you think you can sneak around behind my back without me knowing?" Victoria's face went pale. "Father, I do not understand. Do not lie to me." Richard slammed his fist on the desk. "I know about you and that caretaker. I know about your secret meetings. I know everything." Victoria felt the ground shift beneath her feet, but she did not back down. She had spent her whole life trying to please her father. Now, for the first time, she was ready to stand up for what she believed in. "His name is Marcus," she said quietly, "and I love him." Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Love? You love a man who cleans toilets, a man who has nothing. Victoria, do you have any idea how foolish you sound? He is more than his job," Victoria replied, her voice growing stronger. "He is kind, intelligent, and talented. He was a concert pianist before. I do not care what he was," Richard shouted. "I care about what he is now, and what he is now is a servant, a nobody. You are Victoria Wellington. You will marry someone worthy of our name, not some failed musician who could not make it in the real world." Victoria felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I will not marry someone just because you think they are suitable. I will marry someone I love. That is Marcus." The room fell silent. Father and daughter stared at each other, neither willing to give ground. Richard's face was red with anger. Victoria's chin was lifted in defiance. Finally, Richard spoke. His voice was calmer now, but somehow more dangerous. "Bring him to me." "What? Your precious caretaker. Bring him to my study." Now Victoria hesitated. She was afraid of what her father might do, but she also knew that running away would solve nothing. Marcus deserved to face this challenge head, and she would stand beside him. She found Marcus in the garden, working on the flower beds. When she told him what had happened, his face grew serious, but he did not seem surprised. He had always known this day would come. "I will go to him," Marcus said. "I will come with you," Victoria replied. "No, this is between me and your father. Let me face him alone." Victoria wanted to argue, but she saw the determination in Marcus's eyes. He needed to do this his way. She nodded and watched him walk toward the house, her heart filled with fear and hope. Marcus entered Richard Wellington's study. The room was large and impressive, filled with expensive furniture and artwork. Richard sat behind his massive desk like a king on a throne. He did not ask Marcus to sit. "So you are the man who thinks he can marry my daughter," Richard said, looking at Marcus like he was examining an insect. "I love your daughter, sir," Marcus replied calmly. "And she loves me," Richard snorted. "Love? What a convenient word. Tell me, what exactly can you offer her? A room above the gardening shed, a life of poverty and struggle. I can offer her respect, devotion, and honesty. I can offer her my heart, your heart." Richard laughed cruelly. "What good is your heart? Can it buy her a house? Can it pay for her clothes? Can it give her the life she deserves?" Marcus did not flinch. "There are things more valuable than money, sir. Only people without money say that." Richard stood up and walked around the desk. He stopped directly in front of Marcus, their faces just inches apart. "Let me make something clear. You are nothing. You have nothing. You will never be worthy of my daughter. I want you to leave this property tonight and never come back." Marcus felt his pulse quickened, but he kept his composure. "With respect, sir, that is not your decision to make. Victoria is an adult. She can choose who she wants to be with." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. He was not used to being challenged by those he considered beneath him. "You have courage," Richard admitted. "I will give you that. But courage does not pay the bills." He walked back to his desk and sat down. A strange smile crossed his face. The smile of a man who had just thought of a clever plan. "My birthday party is in 2 weeks," Richard said. "The most important people in the country will be there. Politicians, business leaders, artists, intellectuals. Tell me, what skills do you have? What can you do besides sweep floors and trim hedges?" Marcus hesitated. He could see where this was going, but he was not sure he liked it. "I asked you a question," Richard pressed. "What skills do you have?" "I can play the piano." Richard's smile widened. "Is that so? Victoria mentioned something about you being a musician once." "A concert pianist," she said. "Is that true?" "It was a long time ago. But you can still play." Marcus thought about the night in the chapel when he had played for Victoria. His fingers still remembered. The music was still inside him. "Yes, I can still play." Richard leaned back in his chair, looking satisfied. "Then here is my offer. At my birthday party in front of all my guests, you will perform. You will show everyone what skills you have. If you impress them, if you prove that you are more than a common servant, then I will consider allowing you to marry my daughter." Marcus stared at him. "You want me to perform? I want you to prove yourself. Show us your skills, and I will wed you to my daughter." Richard laughed as he said the words, clearly believing that Marcus would fail. "Of course, if you disappoint everyone, if you embarrass yourself in front of the most powerful people in the country, then you will leave forever, and you will never contact Victoria again." It was a cruel game, and Richard knew it. He expected Marcus to fail. He expected the former caretaker to humiliate himself in front of everyone. It would be the perfect way to end this foolish romance and teach Victoria a lesson about staying in her place. But Marcus saw something else in this challenge. He saw an opportunity, a chance to reclaim his dignity, his talent, his life, a chance to prove that he was worthy of the woman he loved. "I accept," Marcus said. Richard's smile faltered slightly. He had not expected agreement so quickly. "You accept? Just like that? Just like that? I will perform at your party, and I will prove that I am worthy of your daughter." For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Very well. You have 2 weeks to prepare. I suggest you use the time wisely. Now get out of my sight." Marcus turned and walked out of the study. His heart was racing, but his mind was clear. He had 2 weeks to prepare for the most important performance of his life. 2 weeks to prove himself. 2 weeks to fight for his future with Victoria. As he stepped outside into the cool evening air, he looked up at the stars. His mother had always told him that the darkest nights had the brightest stars. He finally understood what she meant. The challenge had been given. Now it was time to answer. Victoria was waiting for Marcus outside the main house. When she saw him walk out, she ran to him immediately. Her face was filled with worry and fear. "What happened? What did he say to you? Are you all right?" Marcus took her hands in his. Despite everything that had just occurred, he felt strangely calm. The path forward was clear now. There was no more hiding, no more secrets. Everything was out in the open. "Your father has given me a challenge," Marcus said. "He wants me to perform at his birthday party, in front of all his guests. If I impress them, he will allow us to be together." Victoria's eyes widened. "Perform? You mean play the piano?" "Yes, but Marcus, you have not performed in public for years. The pressure, the expectations. My father is setting you up to fail. Do you not see that?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I know what he is doing. He thinks I will embarrass myself. He thinks this will be the end of us. Then why did you agree?" Marcus looked into her eyes. In them, he saw love, fear, and hope all mixed together. She believed in him. Even when he was not sure, he believed in himself. That meant everything. "Because this is my chance," he said. "My chance to prove who I really am. My chance to show your father that I am more than just a caretaker. And my chance to finally face the demons that have haunted me for 7 years." Victoria shook her head. "I do not need you to prove anything. I love you exactly as you are. I know, but I need to prove it to myself." They stood together in the darkness, holding each other close. Victoria understood what Marcus was saying. This was not just about winning her father's approval. This was about Marcus reclaiming his identity, his passion, his life. The music had been stolen from him by grief and tragedy. Now he had a chance to take it back. "What will you play?" Victoria asked. Marcus had been thinking about this since the moment he left Richard's study. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. "It was the last piece I performed before my mother died. It is the most difficult thing I have ever played, and it is the piece that lives in my heart." Victoria knew enough about classical music to understand what this meant. Rachmaninoff was notoriously difficult. The concerto required not just technical skill but emotional depth. It was a piece that separated good pianists from great ones. "Can you do it?" she whispered. After all this time, Marcus was honest. "I do not know, but I have to try." The next morning, Marcus woke before dawn. He had 2 weeks to prepare for the performance. 2 weeks to rebuild muscles and skills that had weakened over 7 years. 2 weeks to conquer the fear and pain that had kept him from playing. It seemed impossible, but impossible was all he had. The first problem was finding a place to practice. He could not use the grand piano in the main house. Richard had made it clear that Marcus was not welcome anywhere near the family's private spaces, and even if he could access it, the sound would travel. Everyone would hear him practicing, and he needed to work in private. Victoria found a solution. At the far edge of the property, there was an old stone chapel that had not been used in decades. Inside, covered with dust and cobwebs, stood an old upright piano. It was nothing like the magnificent Steinway in the mansion. The keys were yellow and worn, and some of the strings were out of tune, but it would have to do. That afternoon, Marcus walked to the chapel alone. Victoria offered to come with him, but he asked her to give him this first day by himself. He needed to face the piano without anyone watching. The chapel was cold and dark. Sunlight filtered through cracked windows, illuminating dust particles floating in the air. Marcus walked slowly to the piano and sat down on the creaky bench. He stared at the keys for a long time. 7 years. It had been 7 years since he had seriously played. 7 years since he had practiced 4 hours every day, losing himself in the music. 7 years since his mother had sat in the corner of the room, listening to him with pride shining in her eyes. He lifted his hands and placed them on the keys. They felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. He pressed down on a single note. The sound was flat and slightly out of tune, but it echoed through the empty chapel like a voice from the past. Then he tried to play. He started with scales, the most basic exercises that every pianist learns as a child. His fingers stumbled and tripped over each other. Notes that should have been smooth and connected came out choppy and uneven. His hands cramped after just a few minutes. Marcus stopped and looked at his fingers. They were trembling. The muscles that had once allowed him to play the most difficult compositions in the world had grown weak. The coordination that had been second nature was gone. For a moment, despair washed over him. How could he possibly prepare for a concert in 2 weeks? How could he play Rachmaninoff when he could barely manage simple scales? Richard was right. This was a fool's errand. He should accept defeat and walk away. But then he heard his mother's voice in his mind. She used to say the same thing whenever he faced a difficult piece, one note at a time. My love, every journey begins with a single step. You have the gift. Trust it. Marcus took a deep breath and started again. He practiced for 4 hours that first day. By the end, his hands were aching and his back was stiff from sitting on the uncomfortable bench. But he had made progress. The scales were a little smoother. The notes were a little cleaner. It was not much, but it was something. When he returned to his small room that night, Victoria was waiting for him. She had brought food from the kitchen and a basin of warm water for his hands. How did it go? She asked. Terrible, Marcus admitted. I have forgotten so much. My hands do not do what my brain tells them to do. Victoria sat beside him and gently massaged his tired fingers. You will remember. The music is still inside you. I heard it that night in the chapel. That was one simple melody. Rachmaninoff is something else entirely. It demands everything. Speed, power, emotion, precision. I do not know if I can give it what it needs. You can, Victoria said firmly. I believe in you. Even if you do not believe in yourself right now, borrow my faith until yours returns. The days that followed were the hardest of Marcus's life. He woke every morning at 5 and walked to the chapel before the sun rose. He practiced until his fingers bled, wrapped them in bandages, and continued. He played through pain, through frustration, through moments of complete hopelessness. Some days, everything went wrong. His fingers would refuse to cooperate. Passages that should have been easy became impossible. He would slam his fists on the keys in anger, wanting to give up. On those days, Victoria would find him in the chapel, sitting in silence, staring at the piano like it was his enemy. But she never let him quit. She would sit beside him, put her hand on his shoulder, and remind him why he was doing this. Not just for her, not just to prove something to her father, but for himself, for his mother, for the music that had always been his true home. Slowly, painfully, the skills began to return. His fingers remembered patterns they had practiced thousands of times. Difficult passages that seemed impossible in the first week became manageable by the second. The music that had lived in his heart for all those years started flowing through his hands again. But it was not just about technical ability. The Rachmaninoff concerto required emotion. It required the pianist to pour their soul into every note. And for Marcus, that meant confronting the pain he had buried for 7 years. The grief over his mother's death. The guilt of not being able to save her. The shame of giving up on his dreams. One night, alone in the chapel, Marcus played through the second movement of the concerto. It was the slow, beautiful section that always brought audiences to tears. As he played, memories flooded his mind. His mother teaching him his first song. Her face in the audience at his concerts. Her frail hand holding his as she lay in the hospital bed. Tears streamed down his face, but he did not stop playing. The music and the grief became one. All the pain he had been carrying poured out through his fingers and into the notes. When he finished, he sat in silence for a long time, crying in the darkness. But when the tears finally stopped, he felt lighter. The weight he had been carrying for so long was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer crushing him. Instead, it had become part of his music, giving it a depth and power that technique alone could never provide. On the night before the party, Marcus played through the entire concerto one final time. Victoria sat in the back of the chapel, listening. When he finished, she walked to him with tears in her eyes. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard, she whispered. Marcus looked at his hands. They were calloused and scarred from 2 weeks of intense practice, but they were ready. He was ready. Tomorrow will decide everything, he said. No, Victoria replied. Tomorrow will show everyone what I already know. That you are extraordinary, that you are worthy, that the music inside you is a gift that cannot be measured by money or status. Marcus pulled her close and held her tight. Whatever happened tomorrow, he knew one thing for certain. He had found his music again, and more importantly, he had found love. The rest was in fate's hands. The morning of the final day of preparation arrived with gray clouds covering the sky. Marcus had not slept well. His dreams had been filled with images of concert halls, laughing faces, and his mother's gentle smile. He woke up with his heart pounding and his hands shaking. He lay in his small bed and stared at the ceiling. In just a few hours, everything would change. Either he would prove himself worthy of Victoria, or he would lose her forever. The weight of this truth pressed down on him like a heavy stone. Marcus got up and splashed water on his face. He looked at his reflection in the cracked mirror. The man staring back at him looked tired and scared. But there was also something else in those eyes. A determination that had not been there 2 weeks ago. A fire that had been rekindled after years of darkness. He dressed in his work clothes and walked outside. The estate was already buzzing with activity. Workers were setting up tents in the garden. Trucks were delivering flowers, food, and equipment. The grand ballroom was being decorated with thousands of lights and ribbons. Everything had to be perfect for Richard Wellington's 60th birthday. Marcus watched the preparations from a distance. Tonight, all of these people would be watching him, judging him, waiting for him to fail. The thought made his stomach turn with anxiety. He walked to the chapel for one last practice session. The familiar path through the woods had become like an old friend over the past 2 weeks. He knew every tree, every rock, every turn. This quiet journey had been his time to prepare mentally, to focus his thoughts, to find peace before facing the piano. When he reached the chapel, he found Victoria already waiting for him. She was sitting on the old wooden bench outside, wrapped in a light jacket against the morning chill. When she saw him, she stood up and walked toward him. "I could not sleep," she said. "I kept thinking about tonight." "Me too," Marcus admitted. They walked into the chapel together. The old piano stood in its usual spot, bathed in the soft light coming through the dusty windows. Marcus had spent more than 100 hours at this instrument over the past 14 days. It had become an extension of himself. "Are you nervous?" Victoria asked. Marcus sat down at the piano and ran his fingers lightly over the keys, terrified, but also strangely calm. "Does that make sense?" "It does. You have done everything you can to prepare. Now you just have to trust yourself." Marcus nodded. He began to play, not the Rachmaninoff concerto, but a simple piece that his mother had taught him when he was a child. It was a lullaby, soft and sweet, filled with memories of bedtime stories and goodnight kisses. He had not played it in years, but his fingers remembered every note. Victoria listened with tears forming in her eyes. She had heard Marcus play many times over the past 2 weeks, but there was something different about this moment. This was not a rehearsal. This was a farewell to the fear and pain that had held him captive for so long. When he finished, Marcus turned to face her. "My mother used to play this for me every night before bed. She would sit at our old piano in our tiny apartment, and she would make everything feel safe. No matter how hard life was, no matter how little money we had, those moments were perfect." Victoria sat down beside him on the bench. "She sounds like an amazing woman. She believed in me when no one else did. She sacrificed everything so I could pursue my dream. And when she died, I felt like I had failed her. Like all her sacrifices meant nothing because I could not save her." "Marcus, you did not fail her. You loved her. You took care of her. You were there until the very end. That is not failure. That is love." Marcus felt the familiar sting of tears, but this time he did not fight them. He let them fall. Victoria put her arms around him and held him close. "Tonight is not about proving anything to my father," she whispered. "It is about honoring your mother's memory. It is about showing the world the gift she helped you discover. Play for her, Marcus. Play for her, and everything else will take care of itself." They stayed in the chapel for another hour. Marcus played through the concerto one more time, but without the pressure of performance. He played it as a tribute to his mother, letting every note carry his love and gratitude. When he finished, he felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. As they walked back to the estate, Victoria held his hand tightly. The clouds had begun to clear, and patches of blue sky appeared overhead. It felt like a sign, a promise that better things were coming. "There is something I need to tell you," Victoria said suddenly. Marcus looked at her with concern. "What is it?" "My father, he has been telling everyone about tonight's entertainment. He has been making jokes about the caretaker who thinks he can play piano. He wants the guests to laugh at you. He wants to humiliate you in front of everyone." Marcus felt a flash of anger, but he pushed it down. "I expected as much. I tried to stop him, but he would not listen. He is so certain that you will fail. He thinks this will prove his point and end our relationship once and for all. Then we will have to prove him wrong." Victoria stopped walking and faced him. "Are you sure you want to do this? We could leave tonight. Run away together. Start a new life somewhere else. You do not have to prove anything to anyone." For a moment, Marcus considered her offer. It would be so easy to walk away, to avoid the humiliation, the pressure, the risk of failure. They could disappear and build a life together far from Richard Wellington and his cruel games. But Marcus knew he could not do that. Running away would mean living in shadows forever. It would mean letting fear win, and it would mean betraying everything his mother had taught him. "I have spent 7 years running," he said, "running from my grief, from my past, from who I really am. Tonight, I stop running. Tonight, I face everything head. Win or lose, I will know that I gave it everything I had." Victoria smiled through her tears. "I love you so much. I love you too, and that is why I have to do this. For us, for our future, for everything we could be together." They reached the edge of the main grounds. Workers were everywhere, putting final touches on the decorations. The ballroom windows gleamed in the afternoon sun. In just a few hours it would be filled with hundreds of guests. "I should go," Victoria said. "My father expects me to help greet guests, but I will be there tonight, in the front row, and no matter what happens, I will be proud of you." She kissed him softly and walked toward the house. Marcus watched her go, his heart full of love and determination. Then he turned and headed back to his small room to prepare. He took a long shower and put on the only decent clothes he owned. They were old and slightly worn, but clean and presentable. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. There was strength in those eyes now, purpose, courage. Courage. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus walked toward the mansion. The sound of music and laughter drifted from the ballroom. Cars lined the driveway, and elegantly dressed guests streamed through the front doors. Marcus paused at the entrance and took a deep breath. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for, the moment that would define the rest of his life. He thought of his mother, of her unwavering faith in him. He thought of Victoria, waiting for him inside. He thought of all the years of pain and silence, and how tonight he had the chance to end them forever. Then he straightened his shoulders, lifted his chin, and walked through the doors into the light. The Wellington estate had never looked more magnificent. Thousands of tiny lights sparkled in the trees like captured stars. The gardens were filled with white roses and golden ribbons. Crystal chandeliers hung from silk tents, casting rainbow patterns across the manicured lawns. It was a scene from a fairy tale, designed to impress and overwhelm. Inside the grand ballroom, over 300 guests mingled and laughed. Women wore gowns that cost more than most people earned in a year. Men stood in small groups, discussing business deals worth millions. Waiters in white jackets moved silently through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne and delicate appetizers. Richard Wellington stood at the center of it all, accepting congratulations and birthday wishes. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was the king of this world, and everyone knew it. Politicians sought his favor. Business leaders wanted his partnership. Even celebrities seemed nervous in his presence. But tonight, Richard had something special planned, something that would teach his daughter a valuable lesson about her place in society. He could barely contain his excitement as he watched the clock on the wall. Soon, very soon, the entertainment would begin. Victoria stood near the entrance of the ballroom, greeting guests as they arrived. She wore a simple blue dress that her father had criticized for not being fancy enough. But Victoria did not care about fashion tonight. Her mind was somewhere else entirely. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the door, waiting for Marcus to appear. She had seen the guest list. It read like a directory of the most powerful people in the country. There were senators and judges. There were CEOs of major corporations. There were famous musicians and art critics who had spent their lives judging performances. These were not ordinary guests. They were experts, authorities, people whose opinions could make or break careers. Her father had done this deliberately. He had invited the most intimidating audience possible, people who would spot any mistake, any weakness, any sign of amateur playing. He wanted Marcus to fail spectacularly, in front of witnesses who would spread the story far and wide. As the evening progressed, Victoria grew more anxious. Where was Marcus? Had he changed his mind? Had he decided to leave after all? The thought made her heart ache. She could not bear to lose him. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. Then she saw him. Marcus entered the ballroom through a side door, trying to remain unnoticed. He wore his old suit, the one he had brought with him when he first took the caretaker job. It did not fit quite right. The shoulders were slightly too wide, and the sleeves were a bit too long. Among all the designer outfits and tailored elegance, he looked painfully out of place. A few guests noticed him and whispered to each other. Some pointed and laughed quietly. Word had spread about the evening's entertainment. Richard had made sure of that. Everyone knew that the caretaker was going to play piano, and everyone expected it to be amusing. Victoria caught Marcus's eye across the room. She smiled at him, trying to communicate all her love and support in that single look. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her, drawing strength from her presence. At exactly 9 o'clock, Richard Wellington stepped onto the small stage at one end of the ballroom. A microphone had been set up, and the band stopped playing as he prepared to speak. The crowd fell silent, turning their attention to the host. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice smooth and confident, "thank you all for coming to celebrate my 60th birthday. It means the world to me to have so many friends and colleagues here tonight." Polite applause filled the room. Richard smiled and waited for it to die down. "As you know, I believe in hard work and excellence. I believe that success comes to those who earn it, who prove their worth through their actions. Tonight, we have a special performance that embodies this philosophy." He paused dramatically, scanning the crowd. His eyes found Marcus, standing alone near the back of the room. "My daughter Victoria has recently become attached to one of our household staff, a caretaker named Marcus." Richard's voice dripped with condescension. "When I expressed concern about this relationship, young Marcus claimed to have hidden talents. He claimed to be a pianist of some ability." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Some guests turned to look at Marcus with amused curiosity. So I made him a challenge, Richard continued. I said, "Show us your skills, and I will allow you to marry my daughter." More laughter. Richard was enjoying himself immensely. This was his moment of triumph, the moment he would expose the caretaker as a fraud and end his daughter's foolish romance. So please, join me in welcoming Marcus, our talented caretaker, to the stage. The applause was scattered and mocking. People clapped slowly, the way one might applaud a child performing at a school recital. Some did not bother to clap at all. Preferring to whisper jokes to their neighbors, Marcus felt every eye in the room turn toward him. The walk from the back of the ballroom to the stage seemed to stretch for miles. His legs felt heavy, and his heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. The laughter and whispers surrounded him like a physical force, trying to push him back. But he kept walking. He thought of his mother, sitting in the audience at his first real concert. She had been so proud, so happy. She had worked double shifts for months to buy a new dress for that night. And when he played, she had cried tears of joy. He thought of Victoria, standing somewhere in this hostile crowd, believing in him when no one else did. She had given him back his music, his hope, his reason to live. He would not fail her. He climbed the steps to the stage and stood before the grand piano. It was a beautiful instrument, a Steinway concert grand worth more than everything Marcus had ever owned combined. The black surface gleamed under the chandeliers, and the keys seemed to glow with their own inner light. Richard stood beside him, still holding the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, our performer will be playing. Well, I am not sure what he will be playing. Marcus, what have you prepared for us?" Marcus looked at Richard, then at the crowd, then at the piano. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2. A murmur went through the crowd. Even those who did not know classical music recognized the name. Rachmaninoff was legendary. His compositions were among the most difficult ever written. For a caretaker to attempt such a piece was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. Richard's smile flickered slightly. He had not expected this. He had assumed Marcus would play something simple, something safe. But Rachmaninoff, this was either going to be a spectacular failure or, no, he refused to consider the alternative. "Rachmaninoff," Richard repeated, his voice slightly uncertain. "How ambitious. Well then, please proceed." He stepped off the stage and took his place in the front row, directly in Marcus's line of sight. His expression was smug, confident. He was certain that within minutes, the caretaker would be exposed as a fraud. Marcus sat down at the piano and adjusted the bench. He placed his hands on his lap and took a moment to center himself. The room was silent now. Even the mockers had stopped laughing. There was something about the way Marcus carried himself that commanded attention. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. In his mind, he was not in a ballroom full of hostile strangers. He was in a small apartment with his mother. She was sitting in her favorite chair, watching him with eyes full of love. "Play for me," she whispered. "Play like you mean it." Marcus opened his eyes and raised his hands to the keys, and then he began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 rang out through the ballroom like thunder after lightning. They were deep, powerful, and commanding. The sound filled every corner of the vast space, silencing the last whispers and freezing every movement. Marcus's fingers moved across the keys with a precision that seemed impossible. The opening chords demanded strength and control, and he delivered both without hesitation. His hands, which had spent years holding brooms and garden tools, now danced with the grace of a master in the audience. People who had been ready to laugh found themselves unable to make a sound. Champagne glasses hung suspended in midair. Conversations died on lips. Even the waiters stopped moving. Caught in the spell of the music, Victoria stood near the back of the room, tears already streaming down her face. She had heard Marcus play many times during his practice sessions, but this was different. This was the performance of a lifetime. Every note carried the weight of his journey, his pain, his love, his hope. The concerto moved into its second theme, and Marcus let the melody flow from his fingers like water from a mountain spring. The music was beautiful beyond words. It spoke of longing and loss, of dreams broken and rebuilt. It told a story that words could never capture. Richard Wellington sat in the front row, his smug expression frozen on his face. He had expected hesitation, mistakes, embarrassment. Instead, he was witnessing something extraordinary. The caretaker, the man he had dismissed as worthless, was playing with a skill that surpassed anyone Richard had ever heard. Around him, guests were beginning to react. A famous music critic leaned forward in his seat, his eyes wide with disbelief. A senator's wife pressed her hand to her heart, overcome with emotion. An elderly businessman, who had made his fortune in the arts, wiped a tear from his eye. Marcus did not see any of this. His eyes were closed, and his mind was far away. He was playing for his mother, just as he had promised Victoria. Every note was a prayer, a thank you, a final goodbye to the woman who had given him everything. The music built toward the first movement's climax. Marcus's hands flew across the keyboard with incredible speed. Notes cascaded like waterfalls, each one perfect, each one exactly where it should be. The technical difficulty was immense, but Marcus made it look effortless. Then came the quiet moment. the transition into the second movement. This was the heart of the concerto, the section that separated good pianists from great ones. It required not just skill, but soul. The pianist had to bear their innermost feelings, to show the audience what lived inside them. Marcus slowed his playing and let the melody breathe. The notes hung in the air like prayers in a cathedral. He thought of the night his mother died, of holding her hand as she took her last breath. He thought of the years of silence that followed, the emptiness that had consumed him, and he let all of that pour through his fingers and into the music. The effect was devastating. Throughout the ballroom, people began to cry. Men who never showed emotion found tears rolling down their cheeks. Women sobbed openly, not caring who saw. Even the most hardened business leaders felt something stir in their hearts. Victoria could barely stand. The beauty of the music, combined with her love for Marcus, was almost too much to bear. She had always known he was special, but this was beyond anything she had imagined. He was not just playing the piano. He was transforming pain into beauty, grief into grace. The second movement reached its peak, a soaring melody that seemed to lift everyone in the room toward heaven. Then it faded into silence, just for a moment, just long enough for people to catch their breath. And then the third movement began. This was the finale, the triumphant conclusion that brought everything together. The music shifted from sorrow to joy, from darkness to light. Marcus attacked the keys with renewed energy, his fingers moving faster than the eye could follow. The concerto built and built, layer upon layer of sound, creating a wall of music that was almost overwhelming. The rhythm was driving, insistent, demanding that the listener pay attention. There was no room for doubt or distraction. There was only the music. Marcus felt something happening inside him. The fear and pain that had haunted him for 7 years were being burned away by the fire of his playing. With every note, he was letting go of another piece of his grief. With every phrase, he was reclaiming another piece of his soul. He thought of all the years he had wasted hiding from his gift, running from his destiny. He thought of the long nights in his small room, staring at the ceiling, wondering if life would ever have meaning again. And he realized that all of that had led him here, to this moment, to this chance to start over. The final section of the concerto was approaching. This was the most technically demanding part, requiring speed, power, and absolute precision. One wrong note, one moment of hesitation, and everything would fall apart. But Marcus did not hesitate. His hands flew across the keyboard with superhuman speed. Notes poured out in torrents, filling the ballroom with sound so beautiful it hardly seemed real. The music reached higher and higher, pushing toward a climax that seemed impossible to sustain. And then, with a final series of thunderous chords, it was over. The last notes echoed through the ballroom and faded into silence. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The entire room was frozen in stunned disbelief. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. The sound broke the spell. Suddenly, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. People leaped to their feet, shouting and cheering. The ovation was deafening, overwhelming. Unlike anything the Wellington estate had ever witnessed, Marcus sat at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys. Sweat dripped down his face, and his arms trembled from the effort of the performance. But he did not feel tired. He felt alive. For the first time in 7 years, he felt truly, completely alive. He looked up and found Victoria in the crowd. She was pushing her way toward the stage, tears streaming down her face, her eyes shining with love and pride. When she reached the front, she climbed onto the stage and threw her arms around him. "You did it," she whispered in his ear. "You were magnificent." Marcus held her tightly, the applause still thundering around them. He looked out at the crowd and saw faces transformed. People who had come expecting to laugh at him were now weeping with admiration. Critics and experts were shaking their heads in disbelief. Even the most skeptical guests had been converted. But there was one face that Marcus searched for above all others. One person whose reaction mattered more than anyone else's. Richard Wellington sat in his chair, utterly motionless. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide with shock. The smug confidence he had worn all evening had vanished completely. In its place was something Marcus had never expected to see. Fear, confusion, and perhaps, just perhaps, a tiny glimmer of respect. The applause continued for nearly 5 minutes. People demanded an encore, but Marcus gently shook his head. He had given everything he had to that performance. There was nothing left to give. Finally, the crowd began to calm down. Guests returned to their seats, still buzzing with excitement about what they had witnessed. But everyone knew that the evening was far from over. There was still the matter of Richard Wellington's promise. The challenge had been met. Now it was time to see if the billionaire would keep his word. The applause had barely faded when people began moving toward the stage. Guests who had laughed at Marcus just minutes ago now wanted to shake his hand, to congratulate him, to ask where he had trained. The transformation was remarkable. The man they had dismissed as a worthless servant was suddenly the most interesting person in the room. Marcus stood beside the piano, overwhelmed by the attention. Victoria stayed close to him, her hand firmly in his. She could feel him trembling, not from fear but from the emotional release of the performance. He had given everything to those 20 minutes of music, and now he was running on pure adrenaline. An elderly man pushed through the crowd and approached Marcus with tears still visible on his wrinkled cheeks. He was distinguished looking, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. "Young man," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "that was the finest performance of Rachmaninoff I have heard in 40 years, and believe me, I have heard many." Marcus bowed his head respectfully. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal." "Do you know who I am?" the elderly man asked. Before Marcus could answer, Victoria whispered in his ear, "That is Henry Morrison. He was the lead music critic for the National Review for 30 years. He has reviewed every major pianist of the last half-century." Marcus's eyes widened. Henry Morrison was a legend in the classical music world. His reviews could make or break careers. A single word of praise from him was worth more than 100 ordinary reviews. "Mr. Morrison," Marcus said, struggling to find words, "I am honored." Henry studied Marcus with intense curiosity. "I know every major pianist in the world. I have heard them all play. But I have never seen you before. Where did you train? Who are you?" The question hung in the air. Guests around them fell silent, eager to hear the answer. Even Richard Wellington, who had remained in his seat, leaned forward to listen. "My name is Marcus Ashford," Marcus said quietly. "I studied at the Royal Conservatory. I performed professionally until about 7 years ago." A murmur went through the crowd. People pulled out their phones, searching for information. Within seconds, faces began to change as they found what they were looking for. "Marcus Ashford," someone said loudly. "The prodigy. I remember now. He performed at Carnegie Hall when he was just 20 years old. He disappeared," another voice added. "No one knew what happened to him. I read about him years ago. Critics said he was going to be one of the greatest pianists of his generation." The whispers spread like fire through dry grass. Within minutes, everyone in the ballroom knew who Marcus really was. Not a simple caretaker, but a former concert pianist who had once been destined for greatness. A man who had vanished from the music world and ended up working as a servant on a billionaire's estate. Henry Morrison nodded slowly, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Of course, I remember now. I reviewed your Carnegie Hall performance. I wrote that you had the potential to become one of the finest pianists of the century, and then you disappeared. We all wondered what had become of you." Marcus felt the weight of everyone's attention pressing down on him. For 7 years, he had hidden from his past. Now it was being dragged into the light for everyone to see. "My mother became ill," he explained, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. "The treatments were expensive. I sold everything I had to pay for her care. When the money ran out, I sold my piano. I stopped performing so I could be with her. She passed away 7 years ago." The ballroom fell completely silent. Even the most hardened socialites felt the power of Marcus's words. This was not a story of failure or weakness. This was a story of love, sacrifice, and devotion. "After she died, I could not play anymore," Marcus continued. "The music reminded me too much of her, so I walked away from everything. I took whatever jobs I could find. Eventually, I ended up here working as a caretaker." Victoria squeezed his hand, giving him strength. He looked at her with gratitude, then turned back to the crowd. "I thought my life as a musician was over. I thought I would spend the rest of my days invisible and forgotten. But then I met someone who saw me differently, someone who believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself." He turned to face Richard Wellington, who was still sitting in his chair, frozen with shock. "Your daughter saved me," Marcus said directly to Richard. "She gave me a reason to find my music again. She gave me hope when I had none. I do not care about your money or your status. I only care about her, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of her love." The silence that followed was profound. Every eye in the room moved from Marcus to Richard, waiting to see how the billionaire would respond. This was the moment of truth. Would he honor his promise, or would he find some excuse to break it? Richard Wellington slowly rose from his chair. His face was unreadable, a mask of carefully controlled emotion. He walked toward the stage, each step measured and deliberate. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship. He climbed the steps and stood before Marcus and Victoria. Father and daughter faced each other, years of expectations and disappointments hanging between them. "You made a promise, Father," Victoria said, her voice clear and strong. "In front of all your guests, you said if Marcus proved himself, you would allow us to marry." Richard looked at his daughter, then at Marcus, then at the hundreds of guests watching with rapt attention. Among them were journalists and socialites who would spread whatever happened next across the entire country. His reputation, his word, everything he had built was on the line. "I did make that promise," Richard admitted slowly. "And Marcus proved himself," Victoria pressed. "Everyone in this room saw it. He played like a genius. He showed more skill and soul than any performer you have ever brought to this estate." Richard was silent for a long moment. The tension in the room was unbearable. People hardly dared to breathe. Finally, the billionaire spoke. "When I made that challenge, I expected to prove a point. I expected to show my daughter that she had been fooled by a man with nothing to offer. I expected to expose him as a fraud." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. The hardness seemed to soften, just slightly. "I was wrong. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Richard Wellington never admitted to being wrong. It was unprecedented. What I witnessed tonight was not the performance of a fraud or a pretender. It was the performance of a true artist, a master, someone with a gift that money cannot buy. He turned to face Marcus directly. I have spent my life measuring value in dollars and deals. I have judged people by their bank accounts and their social status. But tonight, you showed me something I had forgotten. There are things in this world more valuable than wealth, talent, dedication, love. Marcus could hardly believe what he was hearing. The man who had mocked him, humiliated him, tried to destroy him, was now speaking words of respect. I gave my word in front of witnesses, Richard continued, and Richard Wellington does not break his word. If my daughter wishes to marry you, I will not stand in her way. Victoria let out a cry of joy and threw her arms around her father. For a moment, the stern billionaire seemed unsure how to respond. Then, slowly, he put his arms around his daughter and held her close. The ballroom erupted in cheers. People applauded. Some wiped away tears. Others raised their glasses in celebration. The story that had begun with mockery was ending with redemption. Marcus stood watching, his heart overflowing with emotions he could not name. He had come to this party expecting humiliation or rejection. Instead, he had found acceptance in a future he had never dared to dream of. Richard released Victoria and turned to Marcus one more time. "Take care of her," he said gruffly. "She is all I have." Marcus nodded solemnly. "I will protect her with my life." The two men shook hands, and in that simple gesture, years of prejudice and misunderstanding began to dissolve. It was not forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a start. As the party resumed around them, Marcus pulled Victoria into his arms. She looked up at him with eyes full of love and wonder. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Marcus smiled, a real smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "No, you did it. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. Everything that happened tonight is because of you." They kissed, right there on the stage, in front of everyone. And for the first time in 7 years, Marcus felt like he had finally come home. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. The world had moved on, seasons had shifted, and life had taken on a new rhythm for everyone involved. But the memory of that extraordinary performance at the Wellington estate remained fresh in the minds of all who had witnessed it. The wedding took place on a warm spring afternoon at the old chapel where Marcus had rediscovered his music. It was a small ceremony, far different from the grand spectacle that Richard Wellington had once imagined for his daughter. But Victoria had insisted on simplicity, and for once, her father had not argued. The chapel had been cleaned and restored. Fresh flowers decorated the ancient pews, and sunlight streamed through the repaired windows, casting patterns of color across the stone floor. The old upright piano that Marcus had practiced on still stood in the corner, now polished and tuned to perfection. Only 50 guests were invited. Close friends, a few family members, and some of the people who had played important roles in Marcus and Victoria's journey. Henry Morrison, the legendary music critic, sat in the front row. He had become something of a mentor to Marcus in the months following the gala, helping him navigate his return to the professional music world. Victoria walked down the aisle on her father's arm. She wore a simple white dress, elegant but not extravagant. Her eyes never left Marcus, who stood at the altar with tears threatening to spill down his cheeks. He had never seen anyone more beautiful. Richard Wellington, for his part, had changed in ways no one had expected. The events of his birthday party had forced him to reconsider many things about his life. He had spent so many years focused on money and power that he had almost lost what mattered most: his daughter, his humanity. His heart taught when they reached the altar. Richard placed Victoria's hand in Marcus's. The two men looked at each other, and something passed between them. Not quite friendship, but understanding. Respect, the beginning of something that might, in time, become more. "Take care of my daughter," Richard said, repeating the words he had spoken months ago. But this time there was no threat in his voice. "Only hope, always," Marcus promised. The ceremony was brief and beautiful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, words that spoke of love discovered in unexpected places, of second chances, of the power of music and faith and stubborn hope. When they kissed as husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in joyful applause. The reception was held in the gardens of the estate. Tables were set up under white tents, and a string quartet played softly in the background. Guests mingled and laughed, sharing stories about how the unlikely couple had found each other as the afternoon turned to evening. Marcus was asked to play. He had known this request would come, and he had prepared something special. He walked to the grand piano that had been moved outdoors for the occasion and sat down. "I want to dedicate this piece to 2 women," he said, his voice carrying across the garden. "The first is my mother, who gave me the gift of music and taught me that love is the most powerful force in the world. And the second is my wife Victoria, who brought me back to life when I had given up on living." He began to play. It was not Rachmaninoff this time, but something gentler, a piece he had composed himself during the long months of preparation for this day. The melody was soft and hopeful, filled with tenderness and gratitude. It spoke of journeys ended and new ones beginning, of wounds healed and hearts made whole. Victoria listened with tears in her eyes. She understood what her husband was saying through his music. Every note was a love letter, a promise, a prayer. This was his gift to her, more precious than any diamond or gold. When the piece ended, the applause was warm and sincere. Marcus stood and bowed, then walked to Victoria and took her in his arms. They danced together under the stars. Two people who had found each other against all odds. In the months that followed, life settled into a new pattern. Marcus returned to performing, but on his own terms. He did not chase fame or fortune. Instead, he focused on music that mattered, performances that had meaning. He played benefit concerts for families facing medical hardships, raising money for those who were struggling just as he once had. He taught masterclasses for young pianists, sharing the wisdom his mother had passed down to him. Victoria continued to work with her father's company, but she also started a foundation in Marcus's mother's name. The foundation provided music education to children from poor families, giving them opportunities they would never have had otherwise. It was Victoria's way of honoring the woman who had sacrificed everything for her son's dreams. Richard Wellington, meanwhile, underwent his own transformation. He still ran his business empire, but he was less obsessed with growth and profit. He spent more time with his daughter and son. He attended Marcus's concerts and actually listened to the music. He donated generously to the foundation and took pride in the good it was doing. One evening, about a year after the wedding, the family gathered at the estate for dinner. Richard, Victoria, and Marcus sat together in the dining room, talking and laughing like people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. It was a scene that would have been unimaginable just 2 years earlier. "I have been thinking," Richard said during a lull in the conversation, "about that night, my birthday party, the challenge I gave you." Marcus looked at him with curiosity. They rarely spoke about that evening directly. It was a memory that carried both triumph and pain. "I was so certain you would fail," Richard admitted. "I was so convinced that I knew everything, that my judgment was infallible. But I was the fool that night, not you." "Father, you do not need to," Victoria began. "Let me finish," Richard interrupted gently. "I need to say this. I spent my whole life believing that worth could be measured in dollars. But that night, I learned that the most valuable things cannot be bought. Talent, courage, love, these are the things that truly matter." He looked at Marcus with something that might have been affection. "You taught me that lesson. You, a man I had dismissed as worthless, and I will be grateful to you for the rest of my life." Marcus was moved beyond words. He reached across the table and clasped Richard's hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "That means more than you know." Later that night, after Richard had retired and the house had grown quiet, Marcus and Victoria walked through the gardens together. The stars were bright overhead, and the air was sweet with the scent of blooming flowers. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Victoria asked. "If my father had not made that challenge, if you had decided not to play?" Marcus considered the question. "Sometimes. But I believe everything happened exactly as it was meant to. The challenge, the performance, all of it. It was the path I needed to walk to become who I was supposed to be." "And who was that?" Marcus stopped walking and turned to face his wife. He cupped her face in his hands, the same hands that had played their way to redemption. "A man who knows what matters. A man who has learned that the greatest music comes from the heart. A man who is deeply, completely, eternally grateful for the woman who saved his life." They kissed under the stars, two souls who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. Behind them, the Wellington estate stood tall and proud, but it was no longer a symbol of wealth and status. It was a home, a place of love and music and second chances. And somewhere, watching over them all, Marcus knew his mother was smiling. Her sacrifice had not been in vain. Her son had found his music again. He had found love. He had found peace. The journey that had begun with loss and silence had ended with joy and song. And the music, Marcus knew, would never stop playing again.